It's Monster Mondays with me, Geoff Arbuckle. It's Monday, and that just so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. I'm Geoff Arbuckle, and, of course, this is Monster Mondays, presented to you by Film Seizure. You can catch new episodes of Film Seizure with myself and Jason Oliver on Wednesdays, but you know what? Mondays, well, they're for me to talk about monster movies. A master of modern horror, monsters, and nightmares, Stephen King takes us to the place where the dead speak and warns of the place the dead walk. It's 1989's Pet Sematary. With a new version of King's 1983 novel on its way this very week, why not take a look at the classic film version? Some might not immediately consider Pet Sematary or many other King's creations. Maybe they don't really think of those as monster movies, but this really is a take on undead creatures. But unlike the undead creatures that George Romero has, like the shambling monsters or even vampires, this is a much more subtle take on the undead. It's also fairly realistic in concept, but I'll talk more about that in a few minutes. As a quick side note, George Romero was supposed to have made this film a few years earlier, but he had to drop out due to him shifting his focus to the film he made in the mid-'80s called Monkey Shines. Pet Sematary is the tale of the Creeds, brand new owners of a home in Ludlow, Maine. Lewis Creed has taken a job as a doctor at the University of Maine. With him are his wife, Rachel, and their children, Ellie and Gage. They soon discover the stretch of road they live on is incredibly dangerous due to speeding semi-trucks that just go cruising along down the road. In fact, within moments of getting to their new home, Gage nearly wanders onto the road, but is ultimately saved by the friendly old man from across the street, Judd Crandall. On the doc's first day at the school, he meets Victor Pascal, who was hit by a truck while jogging. Before dying, Pascal warns Dr. Creed about a pet cemetery that Judd recently took the Creeds to in the woods near their homes. When the family cat Church, short for Winston Churchill, dies from being hit by a truck on that very road, Judd and Lewis ponder how to tell Ellie that her beloved cat is dead. Judd decides to take Lewis up to the other part of the pet cemetery, where the Micmac Indians used to bury their dead. The following day, Church returns, making Lewis kind of believe he must have buried him alive. But Judd tells him that's not exactly true. Church did return, but he isn't the same cat he once was. Some more time passes during a joyous picnic. Gage is killed by a truck while chasing the handle of a kite that got away from him into the road. Of course, the family is devastated, but Lewis, defying a warning from Judd and the ghostly Pascal that had been visiting him during this time, and decides to take Gage to the pet cemetery. And they've warned that this would be a very, very bad idea. Lewis digs up his son and takes him to the soured Micmac ground. When Gage returns, he is nothing short than a monster in child form. He attacks and kills Judd and Rachel before Lewis can arrive and overdoses both Church and Gage with morphine. Devastated by all that has happened and the loss of not only his son, but his wife as well, Lewis decides to take Rachel to the pet cemetery in hopes that her being freshly dead will make the Micmac magic work a little bit better this time. And guess what? She comes back all mutilated and shit and kills Lewis. What makes this movie a little more realistic in terms of its horror, it really deals with deep emotional fears that plague just about anyone. I'm sure there's more subtext and context in the book, and I do know that King wrote this after his own son was very nearly killed by a speeding truck. But, you know, I mean, I ain't going to lie. I don't read no books. Make a book into a movie or into a comic book, and I'll either watch it or read it that way. But anyway, on the surface, at least in the movie, everyone fears something they can't control. For example, Lewis fears, despite being a doctor, that he can't save everyone. In fact, we're not actually ever shown one instance in which he actually does save a life. And of course, Ellie is fearful of losing her first love, her pet cat Church. A side of things I didn't understand when I was younger was Rachel's. At the beginning, she's a bit of a pill. She's kind of set up almost as a take on the type of moms that first started cropping up in the late 80s and are pretty much all over the place now. She's extremely overprotective over small things that you wouldn't normally shelter children from. For example, she gets really angry at Judd for making Ellie curious about death. And to almost drive home the point that it's a tad ridiculous for her to be upset that her offspring would someday be exposed to death. When Judd says that kids have to learn sometime, her only response is to basically ask why. Now, I guess that does play into some of her history, which I'll get to momentarily, but it's something that comes into the story almost to make her out as a villain. It only gets worse when Ellie wants a promise that Church will be okay when he gets neutered. And Rachel forces Lewis to make a promise that he'll be fine, something that as a doctor he knows he can't really ever make. And I guess you could argue that he is almost too clinical about this and that most parents would just give the promise to their child. But I would also think that Rachel would have just stepped in to ease Ellie's fears. But no, she puts it all on Lewis. So if things do go bad, Lewis is the one not delivering on the promise. What's even more interesting is how she becomes the much better character and actually makes a huge turn in the final act. I guess she decided that when her father started a fist fight with her husband during their son's funeral, causing the son's casket to fall and nearly tip open for all to see, it was maybe a time to be a little bit better of a character. So let's get to my 3 things, shall we? For each week, I will find 3 things that I like about a movie, no matter how good or bad the movie is. For my 3 things, I'm going to point out our actual monsters that are present in this movie itself. For the first, it's a little bit of a twofer, and I'm talking about Church and Gage. You take 2 things that are deeply loved by members of the Creed household, and they are twisted by the sour Micmac Indian grounds. While Church is never actually seen in a terribly pleasant light, what comes back from the Pet Sematary is just simply a little ball of furry hatred. There are incredibly funny scenes between the cat and Dale Midkiff's Lewis that just crack me up every time I've seen this movie. The relationship between the two are just terrible. Church is constantly scaring Lewis, and twice he lunges for Lewis's face to scratch it. It's great. Gage, on the other hand, is this cute little boy who ends up becoming a real scary monster with a scalpel. He teasingly calls victims to play with him and cuts up Judd's face and Achilles' tendon and cuts out his own mother's eye, which later oozes this gross yellow head juice when she shows back up to make out with Lewis before killing him. And Gage is just generally adorable, despite you having to watch a kid, a little child, be killed a second time by the father who carries the weight of being unable to protect him in the first place. It's something that I see now as a grown man that is really tough to watch, but it's just super effective. And kudos to King, who adapted the novel himself for the screenplay, for actually playing with those ideas on a very visual level. And what's more, Gage and Church kind of team up together too, and it's almost kind of cute how they do so. Second, let's talk more about the metaphysical monster, the trucks on the quiet patch of Main Country Road. While a road heavily traveled by mostly giant machines, probably driving too fast to begin with is, in reality, very scary, I believe it represents something else, or maybe a couple of things. Frankly, I'm just going to throw these ideas on the wall and see which one sticks best. One thought I had is that the road represents the real world. While at home, generally, you expect you and your loved ones to be safe and happy. The confines of your home bring laughter, love, etc., etc. The world at large, though, even if unpredictable, carries with it bad things or various other obstacles that can break down the cozy walls you erect around yourself. It's almost expected that you do not die from the forces within your home, but from the forces without. The other thought I had that actually could marry with my first one pretty easily is that the road represents loss of control. Again, in your home or on your property, you can control what can enter it or possibly harm or help it. However, when you go out into the domain of the unknown, you aren't able to as easily protect yourself. And that same thought can be applied to any road, as it also claimed poor Victor Pascal, even though he returns as a much more helpful and friendlier force to help Lewis and the various creeds along the way throughout the movie. I don't know, though. Like I said, I don't read books. You can always comment or hit us up on Facebook or through our email at filmseizure@gmail.com if you have any ideas about this. I kind of thought about it in a little bit more of a metaphysical way. Now, my third and final like in this movie is something that has stuck with me since I saw the movie for the first time 30 years ago, and it still freaks me out today. Zelda. Zelda was the older sister of Rachel Creeds that suffered from spinal meningitis. She was deformed, and she just looked like she was a ghoul with jaundice, and she was really just hovering near death. She haunted Rachel because Rachel was left to care for Zelda when she was too young to do so. Zelda died when Rachel was alone with her, but Rachel, as well as her parents, treated the poor sick girl as a dirty secret that was kind of stashed away, and they all secretly wished her dead. When I was 12, Zelda gave me nightmares, and I think it was the way that the actor kind of portrayed her with her hunched over body and the way she moved and how she taunted Rachel through most of the physical way. Now, my third and final like in this movie is something that has stuck with me since I saw the movie for the first time 30 years ago, and it still freaks me out today. Zelda. Zelda was the older sister of Rachel Creeds that suffered from spinal meningitis. She was deformed, and she just looked like she was a ghoul with jaundice, and she was really just hovering near death. She haunted Rachel because Rachel was left to care for Zelda when she was too young to do so. Zelda died when Rachel was alone with her, but Rachel, as well as her parents, treated the poor sick girl as a dirty secret that was kind of stashed away and physical way. Now, my third and final like in this movie is something that has stuck with me since I saw the movie for the first time 30 years ago, and it still freaks me out today. Zelda. Zelda was the older sister of Rachel Creeds that suffered from spinal meningitis. She was deformed, and she just looked like she was a ghoul with jaundice, and she was really just hovering near death. She haunted Rachel because Rachel was left to care for Zelda when she was too young to do so. Zelda died when Rachel was alone with her, but Rachel, as well as her parents, treated the poor sick girl as a dirty secret that was kind of stashed away, and they all secretly wished her dead. When I was 12, Zelda gave me nightmares, and I think